make
bro?
sure I got the right mic working. Good morning,
Good
brother.
morning. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Hey, that sounds good. Here, I'm testing my other mic.
hmm Does my
All
volume look all
right.
right,
Sound
or
great.
sound all right? I should say.
Yeah.
It does, huh?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay, cool. And I can hear you too. It sounds good. So yeah, thanks for coming on, man. It's been a
Hey,
little while.
yeah. Are we recording already?
We're recording already. Why not?
Oh,
Well,
damn.
we
Why
can
not?
always delete it if something goes wrong. Like you say something, you're like,
What could go wrong?
right? You've never regretted anything you've said, right, Jamie?
That's funny though. That's
Yes.
something right there is to have regrets means if you were to go back and redo them or you wish to extract that particular arc segment of time out of your life, and then the two other ends kind of collapse, and that leaves some vacuum, and then that alters the trajectory of the rest of the thing, and then your equation doesn't work out or come
Mhm.
to the same sum. And if your
Right.
sum is the moment that you're at right now and you happen to be pleased with that particular moment, then
Ah,
you, you know
you
like
have a very holistic systems perspective. I like that. Yeah.
that. And that's something I've been reading about lately too, is
Mm.
this we tend to in fact, I've got the book right here, psychological.
Psychological astrology. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
by
a mind fuck right there, right?
yeah, Karen Hammaker Zondag.
Uh-huh.
And she was talking about uh this sort of reductionist way that we tend to, in the West, kind of just look at these little component parts of systems. And though that is fine for data collection and to see, it's like in holistic medicine. You
hmm
could either focus on the organ itself as a discrete uh,
Yeah.
microcosm, I
Yeah.
guess, or you can look at the macrocosm, the organism, and kind of see. And then there's even expanding that. So it's very hermetic in that
Oh
sense,
yeah.
because expanding that out, if you look at the organism, who contains holistically all of the organs, and how these systems contingently operate, and certain operations are predicated on this operation
Right.
further upstream.
That's right.
So it seems like you could also, and this is something that validates the hermetic kind of idea of the microcosm and the macrocosm in recent evolutionary biology,
hmm
is that the organism and its ecosystem have an epigenetic relationship. Have you heard about
Oh
that?
yeah. Have you heard of Rupert Sheldrake?
No, tell me.
Oh, you should look into Rupert Sheldrake. He's a scientist, some would call like a fringe scientist. But he's got this idea of morphogenetic fields and morphogenetic resonance. And he goes into epigenetics a lot. And, you know, yeah, he talks about, cats are cats because there are cats. And like that archetypal form sort of exists, and there's a resonance between all cats.
Yeah.
um I- you know Anyway, I don't want to try to paraphrase this guy because it's been a long time since I've studied him. I heard about him back when I was in undergrad, probably like 25 years ago or whatever it was. And so, but yeah, Rupert Sheldrake is quite interesting. I'd recommend looking into some of his work. He's still alive. He's still putting stuff out too.
I will
Still
definitely do that.
researching. You'll like him.
Yeah, I love, just for your listeners, that idea of epigenetics being that the organism and its ecology or ecosystem are in a constant
Yeah.
dialogue,
Yep.
that human beings alter nature through agriculture, animal husbandry, however,
Yeah.
paving roads, etc., making cars. Our conversation with nature changes both nature and our physiology
That's
over
right.
over time. And I just think that that's fascinating, that you can't. So, sort of, to go on a tangent here,
hmm hmm
uh, we just watched a thing on aliens that a friend of mine, Dash Kalsa, just sent me a link to a recent one of those new unsolved mysteries that came out. You know that they've put out that show again.
I don't watch a lot of TV shows.
Me neither, but he sent me a
Yeah.
link. I watched
Okay.
it. He said it was interesting, and it was interesting, but it was an alien one, and I typically don't buy the alien stuff.
Right. There's
So,
been a flood of that, you know.
so that has me thinking about, at least I don't buy it in the, beings from outer space in crafts who have 4 arms, 4 legs, a number
Yeah.
of fingers, and a head.
Right.
It's like, why would these your typical gray alien, why would they have the characteristics of an earthling, when they're not, or unless they are from Earth, who knows? But so epigenetically, the Earth produces earthlings
Right.
because of that organism and its ecology. This
Yeah.
hermetic
Yeah.
micro macro deal.
Right.
So it's like, to see can you tell I've had a little bit of coffee at least?
It's my second cup, man. I'm feeling pretty good too.
Yeah.
By the way, my interview before you got canceled, so that was really nice because I had to wake up at 3 a.m. to bring my wife to work, and I was like, oh man, how am I going to get sleep for all these interviews and stuff? So I ended up waking up, going back to bed, and then waking up around 7, realizing that interview's been canceled, becoming happy, and then going back to bed, and then waking up around 9:30, and just been awake for about an hour and a half getting ready for you.
But I like becoming happy. That should be the title of your book.
Yeah, becoming happy. Yeah, that's the process. And that actually makes me, I'm one of a presentation I started, a PowerPoint presentation that I started because, I used to actually like to do presentations on esoteric stuff in my lodge before COVID. And now after COVID, everyone's doing presentations. And oddly, I haven't done any presentations. I've just been too busy, and I've been busy enjoying all the other ones. But one I was starting to work on relates to what you're talking about here. I was going to talk about sort of systems theory, emergence, the idea of emergence, the idea of emanation. I think that these are the types of concepts people have to start wrapping their heads around if they really want to break into the esoteric concepts and ideas or the occult. I think that there's some basic changes in the way you sort of perceive the universe that have to happen to even understand, what's behind these veils. And I think it includes having that appreciation for the interconnectedness in depth, as above, so below, completely throughout the universe, all of reality, and how
if you don't have that if you don't have that sense for analogous thought,
yes,
then at least Hermeticism is not for you, and it shouldn't be for everybody. There are things that car mechanics is not for me. I'm not interested in it. I don't know. I can't get my head around it. It confuses me. Accounting, probably not for me. I'm just not that interested in it. I mean, numbers are cool, but it's almost in a strange sort of like Pythagorean sense. I like the idea of numbers, but I almost like their qualitative sense more than their quantitative sense.
Dude,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I know exactly what you mean. And in fact, Pythagoras said all is number. And when you think about, correspondences, whether it's the planets or, whatever else you want to correspond, they always sort of come back to a number, or even houses and signs. There's a number associated with them. So at the end of the day, the grand secret is, what is that qualitative aspect of that number? You know what I mean? Because that's the most abstract form. A number is like almost meaningless. I mean, it's like it's a symbol, but not really. I mean, it's as minimal as you can get.
Yeah, it's funny. You bring up astrology and number, and that reminds me of the idea of harmonic astrology, where I forget who developed it. I know that Rudyard worked in it quite a bit, and it's been a popular 20th century sort of subgenre in astrology or subdiscipline. But it goes back to some of these Pythagorean ideas in that a conjunction. Let's say you have a 360-degree circle, and you have a conjunction right at, say, the MC. Then, which is something we should talk about regarding Saturn and Jupiter later this year. You wanted to talk about the Great Conjunction, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you have this conjunction of planets, then you have one. That is a unity. That is at once 0 and 360 degrees, right?
Mhm.
So if you have an opposition, you have 180 degrees,
Right.
which is 2, because you have 2 halves of the circle.
Right.
If you have let's say a trine at 120 degrees,
Right.
1, 2, 3,
You have 3.
split. Yeah, so you have 3 there, so on, so forth,
Yeah.
sextile,
Yeah.
septile, and it's how the aspects make a regular polygon
Right.
within the circle. So that
Right.
takes us back to Plato and Pythagoras and pure number again, in that you don't have to think of it in terms of your classic, or not classic, but your post-Hellenistic astrological meaning of aspects. You could think of it in this reduced harmonic Pythagorean idea about ratios of that circle, or chords, what you would call a chord of a circle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, yeah, numbers. I mean, I've gotten a sense of, meaning behind numbers, the qualitative aspect of numbers, mostly from, studying astrology, and probably similar for you. When I think of 8, I think of the occult, I think of transformation, I think of darkness, I think of mystery, I think of intensity,
The 8th house.
vortexes, whatever, 8th house, right? It's really out there shit, and scary. Can be dark, but can be profound also. When I think of 7, from an astrological perspective, I think of relationship. That's that 180 degrees, that opposite, of the ascendant, right?
Right.
Right.
Another
That's often
angular
how,
house.
yeah, it's often how people interpret, like, what's your girlfriend or your wife going to be like? What's the nature of your relationships in general? Do you tend to have really smooth ones, or are they really intense and emotional with a lot of fighting? A lot of that can be determined, when you look at the influences on the 7th house. And I'm speaking from Vedic perspective. I studied most of that. I started with Western astrology, but then I fairly quickly moved into Vedic. And 3rd house, for example, I think of curiosity, passion, motivation. There's some of these numbers are more difficult for me, to think about. What are some of the numbers that pop into your mind that you feel like you have a sense of, and how do you see them? Maybe you can put a couple examples out, and kind of stream of consciousness about the numbers.
It's almost like I kind of go to the Sephiroth almost first,
Interesting.
but because this latest personal astrology craze of mine is about 9 months old. So this last 9 months, I've been really, again, deep into Western astrology. But my sort of go-to historically has been a lot more Kabbalistic than that, so in terms of
Right.
gematria, and in terms of Sephirothic number,
Right.
Yetziric number on paths and things. So
I have a
that
little surprise for you.
mm,
I have a little surprise for you. Let me see. I'm going to do something here. Since you brought it up, I'll see if this works. Now it's coded here. It's in reverse. The letters are mirrored. What does that look like to you?
I'm having a hard time reading that.
It's backwards. The letters are backwards.
All the letters are backwards?
Yes. Look at Malkut. What does it say in reverse?
Oh, sun and earth. Where did you get that? Did you make that?
Yeah, I made that just for you, buddy.
Oh,
Just for
yeah.
this call. Yeah, I knew because someone had asked recently, do you have a version of that? And you're like, no, I don't have anything made up. But I
Yeah.
just put that together based on the heliocentric model and the distances.
Let me recommend one thing where you have
It's in reverse, unfortunately. That's the way Zoom put it out there when they do the virtual background. So it kind of mirrored it. It's the mirror image, unfortunately. So it's backwards. So don't let that confuse you. Saturn
wait,
should be in the left pillar.
So I would still put Yesod, the moon, in
Uh-huh.
the ninth Sephira.
Even though Mercury is second after the sun.
And here's why. Here's
Okay.
why.
All right.
So if you just switch, and of course you could do it either way, but here's why I was thinking that. If you just switch Malkuth and Tifereth, so the sun and the earth, like you've done on here, but leave Yesod in the position
as
of
the moon.
as the moon,
Uh-huh.
then you could just take that path. I think it's 26, 20,
Uh-huh.
24, 25, 20, 25, whatever Samek is. If you take that path 25 that goes classically from Tifereth to Yesod, that one, and you just leave that path between the 6th Sephira and the 9th Sephira,
Right.
that means
The middle
that
pillar.
exactly, if you just leave that path there but don't connect Yesod to either Netzach or Hod or Venus, and then
Right.
you
Right.
have our satellite, which is not yet zerically connected to the earth or to the other Sephiroth. So there's only one path that
Yeah.
goes to Yesod in the heliocentric model, because if there were more than one path going to Yesod in the heliocentric model, it would cease to be our satellite, and it would cease to have its own epicycle
Mm-hmm.
around the Earth as
Right.
our satellite, and it would then become in the concatenation of planets that you find normal.
Right.
It's so difficult to
It's
explain.
difficult to explain, but I mean, I originally, I think, brought this up with you before I knew you had come to a similar idea. Obviously you had thought about it a lot more. It just sort of popped into my mind one day because I was thinking, I always thought of the sun as representing the soul, somehow. And I think of, Sophia or the Shekhinah as, representing our inner divinity, right? And that's often represented by the sun. And so I thought, well, wouldn't the sun be in Malkut, hidden in Malkut? Wouldn't our soul be sort of disguised or veiled in this world? And then the sun would be symbolic of that. We have to get to the inner self, which is the sun. That's the mystery. And so that's why I initially thought, maybe that needs to be in Malkut, the sun there. But I wasn't even thinking in terms of heliocentric model or the geocentric. But yeah, it's confusing, and also the fact that if the sun was there and Yesod was the moon, if the sun was Malkut and Yesod was the moon, then that would show this idea of the marriage of the sun and the moon, union of the sun and the moon alchemically is how we transform or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
To something higher, maybe to Tiferet. I don't know. But I mean, it's cool to speculate on all this stuff, though. I mean, because I think I'm not sure everything is completely set in stone, or any of these rules or insights have descended from heaven, and we can't ever doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting model, and hence people, I forget who in the new physics 100 years ago or so, was it Niels Bohr or I forget who, but they were using Yetziric spatial models, and Minkowski, I think, too, was interested in that, because in Sefer Yetzirah, where it talks about an abyss above, an abyss below, an abyss to the east, west, north, south, these 6 abysses that we talk about, and these are of course the 6 cardinal kind of directions, and thus implying a cube. So at that point, when you have this cube, you also have and bringing up my book, I talk about this in a couple of points in the book on the course of 3 steps on the winding stairs, where we talk about the wardens and the master and their corresponding jewels, which you sometimes see on the steps. So, and when I talk about the working tools later in a geometric, under this section of on geometry on the staircase, if you look at the plum, of course, is what in Cartesian coordinates, you would call, I think, the z-axis. The level would be the x-axis, and the square, because it's at a 90-degree angle, a perpendicular off of that x-axis makes a y-axis. So you have the plumb, the square, and the level,
Okay.
which make this Cartesian spatial model, which also make a cube, because you have the 6 cardinal directions. You have the plumb, the level, and the square, kind of front to back, you know?
Right.
So you have the abscissa, the applicate, and the ordinate, is what Descartes would say.
Right. And you go into this in your new book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't, once I get your book, I'm definitely going to read it. And what I'd like to do is
I mailed it on Monday.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow. Still not here. That's surprising. Anyway, let's see what happens. Once I get that, I'm going to read it and, take notes and highlight stuff. And I'd love to have you on, sometime in the future, to give people some time to pause and then maybe do a deeper discussion about some aspects in the book. That'll be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
But I do want to talk just a tad about your book. I know you've talked a lot recently about it because it's just launched, just been released or whatever. And so I didn't want you to feel like you're just repeating the same thing. That gets kind of boring. So I thought if there's something new we could talk about in relation to your new book, like in particular, something that often happens, especially with these types of research books, where you research and you find out information, you put it all together and put it into writing, and then you publish it. And, doesn't really take long after you do that. You realize you learn something new and you're like, I wish I would have wrote that different, or I wish I would have added that nuance there, or that's not actually correct. And now I know. Is there anything like that where you'd want to sort of make an update to something that's in the book, anything at all, or even just a further clarification on something you felt wasn't clear enough?
Yeah, there is, because as I was saying earlier, my current astrological craze has been over the last 9 months. So I finished the first draft of this manuscript slightly more than 9 months ago. So it's really in the wake of finishing that manuscript that I dove.
Past tense, yeah.
That I did. I was wondering if it was like hanged, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I see. I thought you were just so in the now that you didn't understand past or future anymore.
Well, we're at the fulcrum of the past and future, I guess.
Right.
So, anyway, it was at that point, after finishing the first draft, that I really got deep into astrology again. And consequently, there are a lot of things that I would have done differently. But that's something I learned on the first book, is that that's why the first book, or if you're a musical group, the first record is always a greatest hits. If you're a writer, your first published piece is kind of a greatest hits of everything preceding that moment. So it's so that's what the first book was. So at some point, getting to that precipice of, am I going to go public with this work? Is this something I feel like I can get behind? And the answer is, from what I can tell from my personal experience and from talking to other people, the answer is you will never be 100% ready. You'll never be like, okay, I feel that this is 100% and there's nothing more I can do on it. And I learned that on the first manuscript, and on the second manuscript, there's a point where you just have to say, okay, this is ready. Because it's funny, like, I would look at approaching the middle chamber before I sent it out, and I would be like, I'm going to take one more look at it, just another pass, before I send it out. And you look and you're like, oh my good shit, I'm glad I looked again. But you can do that every single time you look at a manuscript. That is a never-ending process. You can revise and edit forever.
It's so true. And sometimes you need that break to get away from it in order to really see where you can improve. You know, I even on papers I write, you know, often I'll read it over and over a few times and I think, oh, it's perfect. You know, I can't find anything else to change. And then I give myself a week or two and I come back to them like, my God, what was I thinking? Let me fix this, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, like anything, this is also a similar challenge I have with doing a presentation on anything Masonic, you know, because I mean, if you have as your cutoff point for your presentation total clarity, and that you now have a complete grasp of whatever your topic is, then you're never going to present because you're never going to get there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you, like you say, you have to just stop and be like, okay, that's as much as I know now, and that's the best I'm going to be able to do in this sort of time frame. And then you caveat it up front
Yeah.
that, hey, folks, guess what? I'm a human being. You know, I could be wrong. You know, this
Yeah.
is based on my own personal research. You know, I hope people get benefit from it. I'm open to corrections, whatever. You know, there's no big deal about it.
There's also the idea of leaving room for synchronistic kind of events, you know, in presentation, let's say. I
Yeah.
find that as I get more conversant and more comfortable with giving presentations during this whole COVID thing, I've done a lot of them, you know, and I've made a
Yeah.
lot of PowerPoints. And I find that my PowerPoints have gone from being these projects where it's like, okay, I've got 56 slides and I'm going to get through them and I've got a script that minutely details each slide. And now I find that I've been paring it down to a more austere approach. And the reason why is because when I have less slides and when I have less notes, or ideally when I kind of internalize my notes and I could just be cued by the pictures in the slide,
Mhm.
that's what I strive for, because that leaves room for, and I learned this being a musician. I've been a musician my whole life, is that, and I've done a lot of improvised music, jazz and lounge sort of stuff. So you play the room, you know, and you leave room for those synchronistic kind of events, and you leave room
Oh
for
yeah.
emergent ideas,
There you
because
go.
sometimes in performance or in live presentation you get inspirited with inspiration. You get inspiration,
That's right.
you know.
So, brother, wait 1 second. My mom just brought me a cortado, so let me grab that. Another coffee, right?
Yeah, get your
I'll be
cortado.
right back.
All
Just two
right.
seconds.
Yeah. So now that we don't have Jeremy here, what do you want to talk about? Wait, I'll read you a nice quote, dear viewer. Wait, no, he's
Oh,
back.
was
Okay.
that too long?
Oh, I was
Oh,
just about to read your viewers a story.
oh, you can still do that. Go ahead, man.
All right, there was one quote I was going to read out of this. I was like, here, let's do, this is, this is Carl Jung in, out of his Mysterium Conjunctionis, as quoted in Psychological Astrology, small paragraph. He says, this background to the universe as a whole partakes as much of the physical as of the mental sphere, and so belongs to neither, but rather is a third quantity, neutral in character, of which man can form only a vague idea at best, for in essence it is transcendental. Synchronicity points to a connectedness, yes, even to a unity of psychic and physical events, which are not linked causally with one another. Hence, it discloses an aspect of unity in existence.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Who's the author again?
it is Karen Hammaker Zondag. Karen
Oh,
Hammaker Zondag.
she's blessed with the name Karen during these interesting times we have. My mom's
Which,
also named Karen.
yeah,
You know about that whole Karen thing, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so my mom's thinking about changing her name just because she doesn't want like people prejudging her and stuff. You know how it is. But anyway, I
Tell her to
digress.
go by Karen and put
Yeah,
like
there
a
you go.
hyphen in it, or
Well,
a,
doesn't it mean like horns or something? Kieran, like horns, horned.
it
I
does.
think that's where it originates etymologically. I believe so.
Hmm.
You might want to check into that.
Call her, if it's Ka Ren, then she could say the Ka is the Egyptian version of Ka, like that
Oh,
aspect of the soul, and the Ren is like relating to the bird or something like that.
Ooh, that'll get some conversations
Yeah,
going.
soul bird. And isn't the Ka also represented hieroglyphically as a bird? I think it might be, unless it's the
Ka or the
Ba.
Ba, or I don't know which one it is. Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah.
There's a
Or
lot of
tell her to change her name to a hieroglyphic,
and become like Prince.
like Prince.
Yes. Just point to the symbol. Don't even talk. Whenever
Yeah, I am.
somebody addresses you, you just point to your T-shirt with your symbol on it.
Or like, or if
it.
your name is like an eye movement, my name is.
Right. Oh man, that's great.
Or if your name is a smell, you just open the box.
Yeah. Here's me,
my essence, purity of essence.
Oh man, that reminds me. I just was watching some videos of abstract artists on YouTube. Try to look for inspiration. I try to learn from different artists. I find artists fascinating, particularly visual artists. I mean, all artists, musicians too. But visual artists often, in explaining their process and their work, they're often very philosophical and quite deep. And especially the abstract artists. I mean, from my
they
perspective,
have to be. They have to be. That's part of the gallery system.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the bluff, right?
No, a friend of mine in Los Angeles is a painter and he's an educator, and he was one time trying out for this show in a semi-prestigious Culver City gallery, and the curator or whatever they call that person, was asking him about the art, and he once said, when he was younger, he said to the curator, well, if I could talk about it, I wouldn't have to paint it, is what he said. And the curator was like, nope,
you're not there yet.
You're not there yet. You don't know our mechanism, buddy.
Right.
You got to be able to talk about this stuff philosophically and with anybody, so if somebody with some dough walks in and they're serious about your stuff, you better be able to talk to them about it.
Yeah, well, there was this one girl, it was one 9-year-old girl who was like painting since she was like 3 or 4, and she was just amazing, and I really connected with her art. I felt a similar aesthetic to what I'm also attracted to in her art. And then there was this other young woman who was who had, what is it called, synesthesia or kinesthesia? Where the senses cross?
Synesthesia, I think it is.
Synesthesia, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And so her thing was vision and sound, which is a common one for those that have this, right? And so when she hears things, she sees colors and forms. And so she paints what she sees through music and sound. And amazing stuff. I'll send you the link. It's beautiful works, very colorful.
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend to have that. But when I was younger, I used to draw music. I would draw it linearly, and it was, so I'd have like these boom, 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 boom circles that I found to be this, and they would be in this sequence, and then I would have like, it was almost like a graphic notation system.
Interesting.
That I had
younger.
When I was probably, right around early teens, maybe 12,
right,
something like that.
Interesting.
But but that bled into actual notation later, and a real I think it was just me precognating what I would understand as music theory later.
Right. Okay.
Which is funny, because music, going back to the book and back to the 7 liberal arts and sciences, music is number in time, you would say, because if you have arithmetic, pure abstract number, geometry, and I'm doing the to track this as I think about this. If you have music and then geometry, which is number in space, then you have music, which is number in time, and then you have astronomy, which is number in space-time.
Right. And so music being number and time, do you think that rhythm is the most basic form of music in a way, or most exemplary to this idea of number and time? Makes me
I,
think of rhythm.
I definitely get into that, but music is one of those tripartite things, like a
Right.
lot of people, which is something else I hope we talk about.
Yeah.
Music is tripartite in that it contains um, harmony, melody, and rhythm. And these things, let's go with melody first. Melody is sort of the spirit of the music, an air, you know.
Hmm.
Um, in
Right.
and I explain it as such and I've in fact never read this anywhere. So
I
I
like good
hopefully
melodies.
yeah, so the melody is the part you grab onto. It's the spirit of the music around which the two other components organize themselves. So, whereas harmony is the soul of the music, it sort of
Hmm.
supports the spirit and is that next order of density uh, preceding rhythm, which is the body. So you
Oh, wow.
essentially have the salt, sulfur, and mercury in there
Right.
as well. The
Right.
salt being the rhythm, the body, the corpus, the soma, um, the harmony being the soul or the sulfur or the anima of the or what you would call the pneuma, or sorry, the psyche in
Okay.
Greek. And then you have at the top you have the melody. So the melody would be the spirit or the mercury or the spiritus or the pneuma. So
Yeah. That's
yeah.
interesting. So the melody and the harmony, um, so harmony isn't that where like you have like two chords and they resonate together or something like that, or and they create a sort of harmonious sound, or am I thinking of something else?
No, the harmony is what supports the melody. So in the absence of a melody, there can really technically be no harmony because you're harmonizing with the melody. It's sort of the support. That's why all the best tunes, you can walk away from them whistling the melody. So when I write music, I will start at the melody because that's the quintessence of the tune, right? So
Right.
you whistle the melody or you hum the melody.
That's what you remember often.
Exactly. And then you support that with chord changes. You come up under that melody and because here's what harmony does, or chords. The chords move the melody along in terms of tension and resolution. Tension, resolution. Like at the end of a measure in music, you might want to have a
Right.
dominant seventh chord, which has a very dissonant flat five interval in it. And that interval wants to resolve
Right.
and it creates this forward motion. Now, what's interesting is that also occurs in architecture. In When you have intercolumnation in classical architecture, those are rhythmic structures per Vitruvius. He talked
Okay.
about this. So in cathedral architecture, you have the same thing. You have essentially melodies, chords, rhythm. Hence, Goethe, I think, is the one who said uh, architecture is frozen music. I
Hmm.
think or von
I like
Schelling
that.
or Goethe.
That it's like cymatics right there. I mean,
Yeah,
and a lot of people are doing some pretty interesting cymatics research these days. I mean, just regular people just getting into homemade equipment with speakers and water and such. I'm actually friends with a couple guys on Facebook who are just heavily into cymatics. I mean, these
yeah.
guys are just daily posting video clips of themselves peering at geometric patterns in the water, and I'm amazed at how many years they've been doing this straight. It's like some kind of addiction that occurs.
It's very interesting, and I looked into it in the
Yeah.
book. There was one roadblock I had in my research on it.
Uh-huh.
So cymatics, let's say you have an upside down woofer speaker and you put a perfectly flat and level surface on there, and you put whatever media you want
Right.
to
To
you want
vibrate,
to
to
vibrate.
resonate.
Yeah, and then you do certain tones, A440, A30,
Right.
432, whatever you do. Um, what you are really getting in that cymatic arrangement of the media that geometrical arrangement, is more indicative of the platform or the container or the media itself than it is of that tone per se. Does
Ooh,
that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah, that's
S-
unfortunate. Yeah, because
Yeah,
you really want to get at the tone,
exactly. So
ideally.
yeah, so in my studies, which have not been obviously of the depth of some of the people you're talking about, but I hit a roadblock in thinking, okay, I
Yeah,
want to get at the tone. I
yeah.
don't care about the cookie sheet that you're putting on top of the
Yeah.
woofer, you know?
Yeah. Hmm. No, that's a good one. It'd be good to have one of those cymatics guy experts sort of react to that point. I think
Yeah,
that's
and
a fair point.
I'd love to hear an argument that negates that.
Right.
I would really like to think that we could somehow pictorially or geometrically see a tone, but alas, these air pressure waves are, seem to be
You know,
elusive.
maybe I'll tag the video when I post this to one of the brothers I know who does some of this cymatic research.
Sean
Yeah,
Picasso, yeah.
I'm sure he'll comment. If I think he likes to watch this show, and he's actually recently got interested in masonry also. So yeah,
I've watched his
yeah,
stuff, and we've been friends. The first time I was on Facebook, we were friends. This time I was on Facebook, we were friends.
yeah,
And his work is brilliant. I think
yeah.
he's a very
And now
sharp
he's making
cat.
it into art. He's doing some kind of computer art with the cymatics now
Hmm.
lately. But that's like a filter in Photoshop, basically, some of the images he's taking.
Obviously, a very brilliant cat, and somebody
Yeah,
who's looked into that
right.
research quite a bit. I'd love to hear something
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah, I feel like it's a kind of alchemical thing that's going on with some of these guys doing the cymatics research on their own, just like home garage cymatic scientists or whatever you want to call them.
Hmm.
I feel like there's a bit of an alchemical process going on, and what I mean there is a lot of the alchemists who do is it called operative alchemy? Or there's another word for it when you're actually using chemicals and stuff, physical.
Lab alchemy.
Yeah, lab alchemy, operative alchemy, whatever. Um, when they're doing these processes, they say that while you're watching these transformations occur, you almost are sensing an inner transformation correlating within yourself simultaneously. You're getting a sense of that in yourself. And I wonder if these cymatic guys are actually going through some kind of alchemical process in their own consciousness there when they're watching these patterns.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's what you that is what differentiates alchemy from chemistry.
Hmm.
Because both of them, sorry, coffee ground.
Oh,
Both of
sorry.
both of them.
As long as it's not COVID, Jamie, be careful, man.
No, no, I'm
All
clean.
right,
I'm
good.
I'm clean.
Uh,
But that's what differentiates alchemy from chemistry, because both of them measure and sort of examine the transformation of elements and states of matter and things like that. They both do that, so they're the same thing on that point.
mm,
But alchemy is differentiated in that those operations that happen in the retort, in the alembic, or in
right,
the crucible, etc., have a corresponding effect in the microcosm of the alchemists. So
right,
it's the
right,
same thing. I talk about this a lot. It's the same
right.
thing that differentiates astronomy from astrology.
Mm,
There's a hermetic effect. Astrology is differentiated from astronomy, both of which calculate and measure and chronicle the cycles and epicycles of planetary bodies against the sphere of the fixed stars, etc.
mm,
But the astrologer has the accompanying hermetic belief that these cycles have an effect in the microcosm.
that's right,
These macrocosmic
right.
cycles affect the microcosm.
Right. And some would argue, I think I'm kind of the line of thinking similar to what you read, that paragraph, in terms of causation. I don't think there's magical forces being emanated from the moon affecting us. I think it's just all about synchronicity, and that it just tends when there's certain patterns and movements in the heavens, there's also certain patterns in the movement simultaneously in this world. And we're just interconnected. So it's sort of like, when I think certain thoughts, my brain shows certain electrical patterns or whatever. But are the electrical patterns causing the thought, or is the thought causing the electrical patterns? Will we ever know? Do we care? Why does it
Yeah.
matter? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't believe in this deterministic material or mechanistic causal effect of the
Right.
planetary,
Yeah.
other than the sun and moon, which are pretty obvious that
Yeah.
the sun
Yeah.
and its effect on the earth. That aside, yes, there is the whole Jungian synchronistic perspective, which I agree with. But another one that is less talked about, that I think that really blows my mind, is Dane Rudyard, and that is the algebrization of astrology. It is so. I'll
What the
break
hell's
it
that,
down
man?
all right. So in a few sentences, if I can do that.
At least it's not the trigonometry of astrology. Then you would have really lost me. But the algebraization, that could work. Let's talk about that.
Here's what Rudyard says, and this is my favorite sort of supportive thesis on the efficacy of astrology, and that is that just as algebra has terms, orders of operation, equations, and all of the component parts, exponents, parenthetical kind of terms and things like that, just as it has these systems which form these equations or these operations, astrology has planets, signs, houses, and aspects. So, and all the various other subcomponents of those four major things. So if you look at astrology as variables acting
Sure.
with each other
Right.
through operations that are aspects and things like that,
Like an algorithm.
essentially you can make these equations and these algebraic expressions out of, and now here's what you plug into those variables. So whereas what we've historically, culturally, and mythologically have plugged into, say, the Venus variable, spans back to Inanna in Sumer, right?
Right.
And goes through Ishtar, and
Isis.
goes through Aphrodite, and goes through Venus, and goes through,
Right.
et cetera, Frigga, Freya, whoever.
Right.
And it really spans this sort of, so Venus is this archetypal concentration. It's Netzach, it's copper, it's all of these things. And that is part of that algebraic expression that is astrology, and how these and the operations, plus like the arithmetical operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, could really be seen as how they are aspected against one another. Like
I get it.
if you have
Yeah.
Venus square Mars, let's say, Venus square Mars in Capricorn,
Right.
in the fifth house, arbitrarily.
Right. So there's sort of like there's an order and a logic and a mathematics to the above and the below, to the abstract level and the concrete level, whether it's astronomy, the more concrete side, or the astrology on the more abstract side. But there's still a mathematics and an ordering and a patterning to how things work, a structure even.
There's an order and a structure because the word cosmos means order and structure and
Well, that settles
system.
it right there.
And because it's one way of looking at it that I find particularly attractive, is to look at the algebra of archetypes, you might say. And if you're someone who's interested in mythology and cultural stuff, and the product of our, say, collective unconscious, and how these emerge, and how these kind of crystallize into these archetypal concentrations, if you find that interesting, then you should find astrology interesting, and you should find nothing that offends your empirical scientific worldview, because it's not about that at all. I don't believe that Saturn in Pisces necessarily has anything to do with life on Earth. It's just a planet that we happen to see from a certain perspective. Pisces isn't even a thing if you go out a light year in any other direction. It disappears.
Right. It's a perspective from where we are.
Right. But
Right.
our perspective, our point of consciousness is located here. So we kind of make sense out of the world
That's
from this
right.
perspective.
Isn't that fascinating? So before I move on, a couple other questions. I want to just finish up on your book. I know we talked about it in the abstract, but maybe just for those that may just be hearing about this book now, maybe if you can just talk about, just very briefly explain the book. I don't want to spend a lot of time because I know you've done that multiple times now, and the title and where people can get it.
So the book is called Approaching the Middle Chamber, the 7 Liberal Arts in Freemasonry and the Western Esoteric Tradition. So the strangely, the title, microcosmically, is also a book. That was a
Oh,
joke. You see how long the title is?
I get it. I get it.
See what I did
Yeah,
there?
that was a book. It's a microcosmic book
It's
in
a
the macrocosm of your actual book. The title's a microcosm.
it's nested within it like a
Yeah,
Neoplatonic sphere.
right. And it's the outer veil of the book too.
It is. It's the veil through which you must pass to get to.
Right.
It's the ring not pass of my book.
Yes.
So anyway, the book is, that's the title, and it is. I I wanted to do it because when I was made or passed the degree of fellowcraft, and then went on to become a master mason, I often thought, well, why didn't we spend more time on that? Was I supposed to learn that stuff? How did I get past if I didn't learn that stuff? I mean, it seems like we just blasted right through the entire curriculum,
Right.
and I
Pass. Yeah, pass. Let's go to
passed.
Master Mason. You're good. You're good. Master Mason time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it seemed like that happened, and then I was like, well, where was all the education? And then I looked in the literature, and I found that, alas, our literature as Masonic literature is pretty anemic in that department. There's
Right.
just not a lot going on in terms of the
Right.
liberal arts and sciences, let's say, or in a lot of components of the middle chamber lecture, right?
Sure.
So I decided, okay, my first step was, I am going to undertake this curriculum by myself, and I am going to it's time for me to finally actually become passed to the degree of fellowcraft. It's time for me to really
For real.
pick up the working tools and apply this stuff after
Right.
years,
Right.
and I was like, okay, I'm really going to do this. And I had no intention of writing a book about it. And then I started to keep notes. I started to keep a Word document, and I started to kind of collate some information around it, because I really felt that as a Freemason, it was my duty to do this, right? And then after there came a tipping point where I was like, wait a second, if I'm putting all this time making a Word document and I've already got 30,000 words in there or something like that, I'm going to publish this.
Yeah.
So it really came about organically and from my personal interest. That's why you get
Wow.
the book from the perspective of the Western esoteric tradition, because that happens to just be my go-to kind of
Awesome.
perspective.
So yeah, I highly recommend this book. I mean, I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. And I read Myth, Magic, and Masonry, and that was for me groundbreaking work in Masonry. And yeah, I recommend that book also. I highly recommend that book. So where can we get your new book? Did you already
So
say it?
the best place to no, I didn't. The
Okay.
best place to go is thelaudablepursuit.com. That's the publisher. So that's Jason Marshall and Matt Anthony. They're great guys. They put out Myth, Magic, and Masonry. They put out P.D. Newman's Alchemically Stoned, which is, I mean, if you haven't read that, you have to read that book. That is a crucial interpretation of the Hieramic tragedy, let's say. So that's, and whether you believe it or not, you have to at least understand the nuts and bolts of that interpretation.
That's right.
Because it's a very compelling argument that he makes.
Yeah.
And it's one of those mind blowers. So
Profound.
and so that's thelaudablepursuit.com. If you must, you can go to Amazon and find both of my books on there.
Yeah, because Jeff Bezos doesn't have enough money yet, folks. We need to help that poor guy out.
Yeah, he needs a little more dough, but
I
it's
think he's
better
on
for
his way. I think I saw an article saying he's on his way to being a trillionaire now.
that's
He's almost there.
that
That's
doesn't even
insane.
register. We can't even
I
fathom a billion.
I
You
know.
know.
I can't even fathom a few thousand, you know.
Well, I mean, it's almost in like some sort of abstract or irrational number. It's like, does that number even
I know.
exist?
I know. How
But
many zeros are there again? Yeah, exactly.
it's like the decimal expanse of pi. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a thing, I guess, or
And then,
not.
you know what also is a thing is that some people remember the decimal expanse of pi out to like, I don't know, thousands of numbers. They just have this, they're like savants. Have you seen those guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
You know what's a trip is now strangely I was thinking about the decimal expanse of pi last night. I forget what got me thinking about it,
Right.
but I was like, there must be a sequence in there where there are a trillion eights in a row.
Or maybe not. Think about this. Maybe the so-called irrational numbers, right? They just go on forever and there's no seeming pattern. Um, think about it like, you know, our infinite, the idea of the infinite universe. But maybe there is an order in the seeming chaos, but it's beyond our ability to grasp. Something like that.
Which is the premise of I think Ray Bradbury story, where from the 70s probably, and I haven't read it in a long time, but he talks about the decimal expanse of pi was created by whoever the creator entity was, maybe aliens or something like that in
Right.
his story,
Right.
but the way that they made it was by the time human beings had the capacity, intellectually or otherwise, technologically or intellectually, to go, they timed it to where the decimal expanse would reel out, and at a certain point the order would be revealed. So, but they timed it to where we would have to have reached this particular plateau of intellectual or technological advancement in order to, which again is an initiation, right?
That's interesting. It also could be that the order that comes out in some of these irrational numbers as they go out might not be a repeating exact pattern, so to speak, that you could say, oh, there's a pattern, you know, it's every seventh is the, you know, the number 8 or whatever it is. But it might be that if you could see it in all of its effulgence, you know, somehow visualized this irrational number, there would be a beauty to it. And
Yeah.
that beauty would be a sign of its order that you will never understand. So, for example, like I think I've talked about on another show that the Japanese have a word for perfect mess. This was on an Alan Watts lecture I listened to many, many years ago, and it always struck me. He talked about this Japanese word, and I've looked for it, and I haven't been able to find it, nor have I been able to find his lecture where he said that. But there's a Japanese word for the perfect mess. Like, and this is used to describe, for example, clouds that are messy in the way they are in the sky, irrational, right? There's not a clear order like, oh yeah, there's a, you know, angle of this and then the cloud expands into 3 parts, you know. No. But in that mess of the look of the clouds, there is this beauty. There is this sense of an overall order that's beyond our understanding. And so maybe these irrational numbers, you know, are emanating beauty somehow, but we can't find it in a linear way.
Yeah, and I think that goes back full circle to what we kind of began our discussion
Yeah.
about, which was reductionism versus holism,
Yes,
right? In
exactly.
terms of looking at the bigger picture, the whole of the system, as opposed to just one little reductive term on the equation.
Exactly. So, all right, let's take a little shift here. Yeah, you know, this is great. I want to talk about magic a little bit. I was actually going to do a watch party about grimoire magic tonight potentially, but I may not have time to do that, especially now that we're doing the show and everything. And this show could be, you know, in place of that, in fact, because I know you have more experience in magic and ritual magic than I do. I'm interested in it. I'm starting to learn about it. But I would like to go over some so-called basics, I guess, from not only my own learning. I'd like to hear your thoughts on certain things, but also maybe some of our listeners who don't really know much about magic. Um, and so one of the terms I always hear about is grimoire. Look at the grimoires, or people study the grimoires. What are the grimoires for those that don't have any idea?
So a grimoire is cognate with the word grammar. So it's funny, and again, going back to my book, in the section on grammar, I have a pretty long segment on the grimoire tradition. So
Right, and that ties in with spell.
yeah, exactly. To spell something. Yeah.
Right.
So that one I hadn't gotten it. I haven't really researched if that's a legitimate etymological thing, spell and spell.
Right, I know. Yeah.
But the grimoire thing actually is. A grimoire is a grammar on magic, just as you can have a grammar on. So grammar
Oh,
is
that's
not just,
awesome.
it's not just syntax and all these
Well,
things.
this is this algebratization you were talking about.
Hmm.
Whether it's astrology, for example, right?
Right.
It kind of, there's a connect here too.
There is, and it's again very hermetic kind of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this the a grimoire is just a set of rules for in a certain discipline or a certain domain.
Right.
Um, like Vitruvius's De Architectura could be considered a grammar on architecture, or a grimoire on architecture. It's just the French, you know. So they're etymologically, or they're cognates and cognate. But so the grimoire tradition, um, from my research,
Hmm.
uh, spans back to cuneiform tablets, the Enuma Anu Enlil, I think it's called, Enuma Anu Enlil, which was a cuneiform tablet, and I forget if that's different from Plimpton 322. But anyway, it is Omenic literature. The Omenic literature of the, I think it was the Akkadians. So it was after,
Omenic, like omens.
like omens, yeah.
Okay.
So most of the stuff you find in the grimoire tradition has astrology at its base,
Yeah.
and that's and in the Omenic literature, which is the dawn of the grimoire tradition, it's just a collection of certain uh, auspicious time. It's really electional. It's sort of
Yeah.
like the precursor to electional astrology.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then later on, you get the Greek magical papyri. You get, you know, you get the medieval grimoire tradition is a lot of what we end up talking about most. Um, Now, I haven't researched this since the book, but uh, there's a wealth of there's a wealth of astrological, Kabbalistic, and Hermetic sort of material in this grimoire tradition, spanning the the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, and then it kind of dies down around the Enlightenment. But then you still get the 19th century sort of with Francis Barrett and his Magus, you get a resurgence in it. And there are still grimoires coming out today. There are some great publishers whose names are not immediately springing to mind who put out modern grimoires. And they're essentially just um, grammars on magical operations, and the
Kind of like,
Solomonic grimoires.
right, kind of like instructions
Yeah.
on operations, how to do a magical operation, like somebody's own personal approach, and there's
Yeah,
like
it's
tons of them.
there's like best developed practices, and a lot of them
Ah,
can't
best practices.
cannibalize that. A lot of
Right.
them cannibalize their predecessors, like Francis Barrett's Magus is essentially a cannibalization of Agrippa's 3 books on occult philosophy, which I
Right.
think is sort of a grimoire of grimoires, because it's really a compendium of uh everything that kind of came before. And it's a nice compilation of all of those things that came to a head when the Byzantine Empire fell. A lot of Greek literature had come into Western Europe, particularly to Florence, through Leonardo di Pistoia brought these documents to the Florentine Academy. Cosimo de' Medici had Ficino translate them. That became the whole Florentine Neoplatonic movement and the Hermetica and things like that. And then at the same time, you had, through Spain, you had a lot of Kabbalistic literature coming through the south of France and then into Italy. So there was this convergence of Kabbalistic, Greek magical and Hermetic literature, astrology, and alchemy, all converging with this Kabbalistic current through Spain. And really,
and that would have been a cool place and time to live in Spain at that time when it was all coming together like that.
Yeah, if you could keep the fleas off of your face,
right? Yeah,
and keep the rats from biting your toenails and stuff.
Right, exactly. And you can do without the air conditioning,
right?
And the central heating and stuff.
Yeah.
and no Facebook. Sorry, folks.
Right.
Yeah, Jamie's fine with that though.
That part, yeah.
Yes. So, some people, when they think of magic and they think of, contacting, angels or spiritual beings of any kind, they think this is wrong or this is somehow evil. And I'd like to get your thoughts on why that might be that people think that. And I'll throw this out. This is something I've thought of. We are beings, right? We are human beings, right? There's animals. Those are another kind of being in this world. And I interact with you. I say I have a goal. I want to, help out the homeless people, right? And I work with you because I think you got a passion for that too. And I know that if we work together, we can get more done on that front. So I reach out to you and I coordinate with you. Now that's not evil. I'm working with another being in this reality we live in to coordinate to do something good in the world. Now, if there are other beings that are invisible, why does their invisibility? What is it?
Invisibility.
Oh, there we go. It's still relatively early. So
invisibility.
Only my third cup of coffee. You got to cut me some slack. And so invisibility. So does their invisibility suddenly make it evil to reach out and try to coordinate with them on efforts just because they're invisible? I mean, to the naked eye, I mean, what if you're trying to do good? You're just trying to collaborate. You're a very collaborative person. You even want to collaborate with angels. Why not? They're nice people, or maybe they are. Thoughts?
So, all right. So to go back to the beginning of that,
right.
I would say that there's been a distinction made between what they call theurgia and goetia. So, briefly,
is that the theurgy and thaumaturgy? Is that Goetia, thaumaturgy, or no?
I don't think those are the same. I think Goetia has more to do with the Shem HaMephorash and these 72 demons or jinn.
Right.
And this, but I don't think that's evil either. That's my personal opinion. So theurgy would be essentially divine intercession in a willed activity, I guess, is a way you could sort of translate that. To ask for divine intercession into and whether that's a transcendent divinity or an immanent divinity, because I think that's a big difference, and that's something everybody needs to sort of suss out for themselves, whether that is a inherent holistically in the makeup of your psyche, or if that is some animistic force, some sort of transcendental, though animistic force that you are summoning or conjuring or invoking in an operation, a magical operation, which can be thought of as an expression of the will out into the world, I guess, is a good way to say that.
Okay.
So that's the theurgy part. The Goetia part, which is sometimes, people conflate that with black magic. I personally do not. I personally do not make a distinction between white magic and black magic. at least not in the sense that you generally read about it. I guess it's a way to say something. Hey, that's not a good activity you're engaging in, or hey, that's mean to somebody, or rude, or
Right. Well,
that's
I mean,
dangerous.
couldn't the distinction really be what the sort of motive and intention is? So, for example, if I have a knife and I'm using that knife to slice bread, that's white magic. But if I'm using that knife to stab Jamie Lamb, that could be black magic. I mean, could that be a way of seeing it? It's just about what are you trying to do with it? Are you trying to do good or evil with a mechanism?
I guess so, but then then the individual would have to suss out the problem of good and evil, which good luck on that. I mean, that's been something that's going, because,
True, I
all right,
guess. Yeah.
then let's get into Al-Khadir. Al-Khadir was the green one, and he walked, and Musa, or Moses, in the Quran was told to walk with Al-Khadir and learn from him. The green
The
one,
green one. The green
yeah, no, different guy.
the different
No, he's a hermetic figure in the Quran.
Yes, I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he did these certain actions that on the surface appeared to be evil actions. Like, why did you do that? And the first thing he says when Moses is going to walk with him, he says, do not question anything I do, just learn from me, right? And he comes upon this guy and he kills this guy in the street. The green one kills this guy. And then Moses is like, what did you do that for? That was unprovoked. I don't know the exact language, but something like that.
It's like, dude, that wasn't so spiritual. What's going on?
Yeah, dude. And then he's like, and then the green one is like, he's like, don't question me. And you said you promised that you wouldn't. And then they walk, and then he does another thing that is seemingly very terrible. And he's like, one more time and I'm cutting you loose. And then then he does one other thing, and Moses is just at his wit's end, and he's like, why did you do that? And the green one says, okay, we are done at this point, so you can no longer follow me. And then he proceeds to tell him how that little segment that he was able to see of that activity, he was not able to see the causal effect of that, why he killed that guy, because
which
he was
may have actually saved 100 other people by killing that guy, for example.
Exactly. So this is where
I've heard that story. It's a great one.
Yeah, and it's been told in other ways, and that might not even be the first appearance of it, but it's in the Quran.
Right, but that example doesn't take away from that basic idea that I was talking about the intention being good or evil. So in this case, his actions had on the surface appeared evil, but his intention and his depth of vision that was good.
Mm-hmm.
So I would still call that white magic, but it's just on the surface, people aren't seeing how it connects.
Yeah, I guess my thing with white and black magic is that it seems to be hastily and arbitrarily applied. And it is sometimes applied out of, Goetia is black magic. Well, not necessarily, because you're dealing with concentrations of astral energy or astral light, right? And because in the Goetia you deal with 72 demons, just like Solomon or Suleiman dealt with the 72 jinn to build the temple,
right?
And just like you deal with 72,
and he wasn't a bad guy. A lot of people talk a lot of good things about King Solomon.
Yeah, and I think at the end, though, he got in trouble for practicing magic, some sort of goetic magic.
Right.
So
yeah,
but ethics, and that's and it's really what we do in Freemasonry is develop that stuff to a large degree, right? I mean, through the speculative application of the working tools, we are good men becoming better men. And one way to become a better man is to become more conversant in systems and holistic systems, and to pay attention to the fellow craft degree, because in the light of, I'm about to come up with a quote. In the light of knowledge, the shadows of ignorance disappear. I don't know, but you see what I was trying to.
Yeah, famous quotes by Jamie Lamb.
I could have done a better job on that, but
It's out there now, so you can always improve upon it.
I got to improve on it in the light of knowledge. And there's probably already one similar,
Right.
but you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
as we develop intellectually, and as we conversely, we simultaneously develop ethically and morally, because no system can develop out of proportion, just like a tree. Just like if you were working out, right, and you really worked out on your upper body, your lower, you couldn't reach your maximum potential unless it was a holistic workout. You know, you would never get super buff arms if you had little skinny chicken legs. I mean, it happens, but
Yeah.
you can't max out unless unless your mind, body, and spirit are.
Right.
And that's the other thing. You could be anemic in. You could say, okay, you could say I eat garbage food and I drink too much alcohol and I smoke too much pot.
Right.
You could say that stuff, but you could say, okay, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to invoke the blessings of deity, and I am going to do all of this stuff on the spiritual plane. But if you don't stop eating McDonald's and drinking all your Pabst Blue Ribbon and smoking your cigs and doing bong hits,
Right.
you are not going to reap the physical. You're totally neglecting the physical plane. That's why, exactly, and that's why I don't like to hierarchicalize, if that's a word, hierarchicalize.
Like only this is good, the other stuff's lower.
Yeah, I don't like to think of here's the spiritual plane, here's
Right.
the mental plane, here's the physical plane.
That's right.
If those things are growing, none of them will grow out of proportion. So your physical plane
It's all interconnected.
is just as, because how do you experience?
Well, they say the body is your temple, right? Remember, that's an old one.
They say it in Freemasonry.
Yeah.
The house not made with hands. When we do memorization work, we create the temple in our psyche. You know, we create the temple in our heart. There are various scales and planes of this macrocosmic and microcosmic temple.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that has also, I've been thinking about lately is, now that I've been studying a little bit about magic, is, some of these operations are quite complicated. There's a lot of things you have to say and do, and, different paraphernalia you need around you, and different sigils and whatever signs for different angels or different planets or whatever. Is that all necessary? I mean, I feel like I want to sneeze, but is that all necessary? I mean, is there a simpler way? Like, say I wanted to get a relationship established with Raphael, the Archangel Raphael. Is there a very simple operation that, if done well and of high quality and with feeling, and you're really into it, and you're into doing the quality, not the quantity of things, is there a simple way to do this where you can connect just as well as a very complex way? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. So if you want to connect, there is, if you want to do prescribed operations like the Abramelin operation, which is it takes 6 months, and there's all the accoutrement.
And there's a chance you could lose your mind, and
so if you want the product of that operation, you should do the sequence to get there and do the prescribed operation, if that's what you're interested in.
Right.
So I guess the first thing, let's take this back to algebra, because I think this is a great way it's a great analogy. If you see a certain sum, and I've done this countless times in my life, and it always works. If you see a certain sum that is the best possible outcome, and you are able to visualize concretely and get as empirically involved in this visualization, this product of your imagination, and really concentrate and crystallize this best possible outcome, or whatever the sum of the equation is. If you are able to see that, then all of the terms of the equation between this point and that point those variables begin to be solved.
Or they start to manifest or emerge of themselves, kind of,
Of
because that goal is really crystallized.
Yes, sort of themselves, and here's I think how. Because if we've set our consciousness on this certain outcome, then everything between us and that are just, so let's plug in a real life scenario. Me and the wife have moved across the country several times, big, tedious, complex jobs with millions of things to do, where if you were to look at all the terms, all the things that need to happen in sequence, you would be like, that is impossible.
Right, that's true.
But since we have visualized, we would actually have sessions where she and I would magically ritualize that outcome on many different subjects, right? But let's say a move across country. We would visualize where we want to live, the house we want to have, the situation, how far we commute from work, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it, and really just ritualize it and get that as crystallized as possible. Then everything between us and the fruition of that goal becomes a binary decision that happens incrementally, naturally, that you almost don't even have to consciously think about,
right,
because you've trained yourself on that, and you periodically renew it and strengthen that vision. And writing a book, that's another one. I just wrote a book that was 138,000 words. It's 452 pages. It's massive. It's
wow.
a pretty big,
Yeah.
big undertaking with a lot of moving parts, a lot of research, a lot of stuff that had to happen contingent on other people and things outside of my control, seemingly,
Yeah.
that needed to happen. But the completion of these things can happen when you've concretely visualized the end, and then everything between. It's just like one of those pinball games where you drop the ball bearing in the thing and they tick, 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 tick against the bumpers. You ever see that game?
Oh yeah.
So it's like one of those, but it's active and passive.
I see.
Either these the little minutia that comes between you and the fruition of that, you're either making active or passive decisions. And if you've set your mind to it, you're going to make more active than passive.
Okay, great. So this makes good sense. I mean, on a mundane level, this reminds me of sort of the power of positive thinking, and but how will we connect this now to my fundamental question of how can we do the most basic operation and have it be potent without having to be overly complex? And I'm imagining you're going to tie this to somehow having this crystallized vision of a goal, and then having some minimal things that come into place that kind of coax it along in that direction.
Well, I would say that there's lots of ways to do it. So
Okay.
depending on what your goal is, you can go see a therapist. You can go to the gym. You can. Not knowing what your goal is and the situation of your life makes it hard to kind of come.
Right.
If you're talking about using classical magical elements in your operation, then I would say use what I like to do is I err on the side of hermetic magic. So that involves the sympathy between the microcosm and the macrocosm at its core. And when you look at that vis-a-vis the Florentine Academy, like what Ficino did with chains, he would say chains, or what Paracelsus did with signatures. Do you know those two concepts kind of?
Well, yeah, the signatures, like, in herbalism, they talk about the doctrine of signatures.
Exactly.
Like a plant that looks like the kidney might be good for the kidney.
That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a whole developed system of signatures that largely come to us through the work of Paracelsus in spagyric alchemy.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you pick the plant
Yeah.
at a auspicious hour under a certain planetary rulership,
Right.
and you do the operations in concordance with planetary movements, and you utilize the sympathy of those signatures.
That's what it's about, the sympathy of the signatures and getting as much of that resonance going as you can, right?
Yeah, and that's 99% of my personal magical practice.
So do you feel like if you understand that construct and you understand the logic that you're talking about there, that you can really do magic kind of on your own in a way, and you don't have to follow someone else's structure? If you get if you get that basic logic of how things work, and of course work with the real correspondences, try to find out what these correspondences actually are. Don't make those up,
Yeah,
right? So if you're working with classical correspondences and you get it, you understand what this is all about, could you do your own operation?
absolutely. Yeah, that's what it's all about is
Okay.
yeah, there are sort of milestone, or like let's say there are good examples of operations that have been successful for groups of people. You
Mm,
know, like the Abermelon that we mentioned. You know, this is
right,
something that's written in a book, and people have
right,
done it to attain knowledge and conversation of
mm,
their holy guardian angel, let's say.
right.
You know, but so there are, again, best developed practices in
Sure.
grimoires,
Right.
like we said, but if you know the nuts and bolts of magic, or a particular magical tradition like hermeticism or astral magic, ceremonial magic, if you know the grammar of that tradition, then you
Mm,
could write your own story,
right.
you know.
So what about if you wanted to collaborate with some angelic beings in a way, like for some good cause? I mean, how would you go about doing that with a magical operation? I mean, how would you describe that relationship building process, and so that you guys can become collaborators?
So I would say that there are operations for that, for either your holy guardian angel or for certain archangels or angelic beings. There's the aforementioned Shem Harmephorash with these 72 angels. There's certain workings with your personal. When I say demon, I don't mean it as in,
You mean
Pazuzu and Linda Blair.
Damon, right? The Daemon, like Socrates had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really kind of a higher self,
Right.
right?
Mm,
So if you're in, and if you're interested in that, there are certain operations. What I would say is get to know the entity with which you would like to work,
mm,
and then work on a proper invocation of that
right.
entity.
Right.
Just as in the Masonic Lodge, we invoke the blessings of deity.
Mm,
So the blessings of God, right?
yes.
And we say, we use a pronoun, the great architect of the universe, right?
Mm,
Just as this sort of deific form. But is it not really the egregore of the lodge? So an egregore being
oh, that's great.
a collective thought form. So if we have a Masonic lodge, you and I and 20 other people, um, our collective projection of deity forms sort of a holographic egregorical
Yeah.
image, right?
That almost
Because
has a life of its own at the end of the day.
it exactly has its
Yeah.
own being and
Right.
existence. And theoretically, right?
Right.
Because and I use the word holograph kind of purposefully, because from my understanding, a holograph is when several lasers intersect and form what appears to be an image
Yeah.
from different perspectives, right?
Hmm.
So just as the 25 Masons in a Masonic lodge project their idea of deity, they all come together in a crystallization that is the egregorical deity of that lodge. So when we invoke the blessings of deity, we are doing a magical operation in that we are invoking the egregore of the lodge purposefully to oversee our work. That is theurgy. Remember, we talked about divine intercession in the
Mm,
activities of man. So we are doing exactly a theurgical invocation uh, of an egregore
right.
when we do that.
Right. The other thing that just sort of pops into my mind, and this is something I thought about when I lived in Africa, and I would go to spirit possession ceremonies. You know, I was into djembe drumming. I studied for, you know, almost 20 years. Now I don't drum that much anymore, but at the time I had a record label, and I lived in Mali.
Do you still smoke pot? No, I'm kidding.
We'll talk
Don't
offline.
answer.
Well,
Djembe drumming.
I don't
know.
work for the government anymore, so I'm free now, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but I was studying traditional djembe drumming, so not just like let's get stoned and go in the park with the hippies and like not bathe for days and just like beat like really.
So
boring.
not patchouli djembe drumming.
Not patchouli djembe drumming, but actual like traditional West African drumming, studying with some you know, older African masters that know the tradition.
I see.
So I was rigorously studying it, and in the source country, Mali, where really some of the best, most authentic traditional djembe drumming comes from. So I used to be into spirit possession, like kind of voodoo drumming. That was my favorite thing. And so I used to go, you know, usually once a week. On the weekends, there would be a ceremony, and you know, we drum, there'd be singers, and then people would get possessed. It can be really wild sometimes. But I often wondered, like, so what's the deal? I mean, there's these different gene, you know, and they all have the names, like there's Bore John, there's Sajo, there's these different, you know, beings, these spiritual beings, Gina or genes. And how, so say we call one down here and there's this person dancing and they're possessed by this spirit, but then in another village down the street, there's that same spirit possessing somebody. So are there millions of these same entities, sort of like human beings? And there's like Sajo beings, or there's Michael beings. Like, for example, if somebody's working with Raphael in your language, you know, here in my town, and someone in another town is working with Raphael and communicating, are those two different Raphaels? What's going on there? I mean, have you thought about this?
I haven't thought about this sort of multiplicity of archetypes, if that's what that
something like that. I'm trying to figure out, are they different beings? Is it one sort of entity that's just able to communicate with multiple people at the same time? What are we doing here?
Here's what I just knee jerk. Here's what I think is happening. We are tapping into an egregorical complex, right? So this concentration, this archetypal concentration that is Raphael, right, can be accessed by anyone who knows its attributes or recognizes its attributes, right? So I think that in order to tap into that archetypal concentration of what is Raphael, right? And then wait, so let me just say this real quick, because there's a lot of confusion between an archetype as such and an archetypal image, right? And even in Jungian literature, he did not make that distinction until something like 25 years down the line. So he started using the word archetype in sort of the Platonic formal sense, but it wasn't until 1946, I believe, after developing it in 1920 or so, it wasn't until then that he had finally nailed down for everybody that there's a difference between the archetype as such and the archetypal image. The archetype as such precedes manifestation. It is exactly a Platonic formal idea that can't be accessed, and can only be accessed through symbol, and the symbol is the archetypal image. You know, that is how an archetype manifests, in the form of a symbol. So yeah, we know that now, right? But that's something that's fast and loose when people say the word archetype. Are you talking about the archetype as such, or are you talking about the archetypal image? You know, so when it is manifest content, it is the in the form of a symbol. It is a archetypal image, like the mother.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so there's the archetype of the mother, which can manifest in myriad forms.
But
there is a cave that you're in, where you are in the womb of the archetypal image. The cave is the mother archetype. just
Right.
as the church is the mother archetype, just as the high priestess in the tarot is a manifestation, an archetypal image of the mother archetype.
Right, and then there could even be seen like the human archetype, and then we're all different manifestations or crystallizations of that emergent archetype into reality, into form
Right.
somehow. And I wonder then, could we then say when people are contacting Raphael at the same time in multiple locations, are these different just images from the archetype of Raphael?
I would say, in light of,
Yeah,
from the perspective of
yeah,
that Jungian kind of thing,
yeah.
I would say that we are, in our interaction with Raphael, we are symbolizing, through the creation of a symbol, we are working with the archetypal image.
Yeah, I think that's a fair, way to analyze it, and that's kind of how I would unpack it too. It's the best I could come up with at this time. Because yeah, it is confusing. I mean, to think, are we talking to the same exact being? Then how are they talking to two different people in two different locations
Because
with
maybe
different characteristics? And
maybe they're using a different grammar or a different chain in Ficino's language.
hmm.
Maybe they're using
Oh,
a different operation, or there are some subtleties in their correspondences between them and the expression of that archetype.
that's fascinating. So it could be just to sort of chain the link of communication we have as a certain type of communication that's taking place to that archetype, but someone else could link up to that archetype through a chain of communication of some kind and be tapping into another channel on one of the archetypes.
Exactly. And
You
here's a
know?
way, here's a good way to see it. If
Right.
I set up a red candle
Uh-huh.
and I play Holst's Mars on the stereo, right?
Mhm.
The Mars suite by Holst or whatever, from his planets, and I light a red candle, and I do this on a Tuesday, and I meditate on these martial, assertive, aggressive sort of qualities, whatever I feel like drawing down. Somebody across the street could be meditating on Geburah and the magical or the gematria value of Geburah, and how
Mhm.
it is 216 and how that relates to a cube. And they could be in meditations or in some sort of mystical activity, breathing and otherwise, meditating on that stuff, thus drawing down some of that Geburic martial energy. Whereas I'm doing also a martial operation with different
Right.
sort of media, different symbolic representations of the archetype as such.
That's awesome. So, brother, we're running out of time. It's been about an hour and a half, but I wanted to maybe end the show. Maybe if you have any thoughts on what's going on astrologically these days. I mean, have you been looking at what's going on, or anything that you're aware of that's coming up that you think is interesting?
Well, the big thing is December 21st, 2020, when we're going to have a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on about the first degree of Aquarius.
Is that, but that's a speculative conjunction, right? It's not operative, so it's not sidereal.
Uh,
I'm teasing you, man. You know how I am.
oh, in terms
Right,
of
it's a
it being,
speculative conjunction. Like in actuality, the conjunction might be earlier or later or something. The
I
actual
see.
astronomical conjunction
So
relative
I
to
th-
us.
so I think the conjunction of the two planets is happening. Whether it's on the first degree of Aquarius is a tropical sidereal
Right,
dissonance.
right.
So
Exactly,
it
exactly. No, you're right. The conjunction stays the same. That's my mistake, actually.
the
I,
conjunctions the
yeah.
conjunction's going to happen, and in Western astrology, to qualify it, we would say it's on about the first degree of Aquarius.
Mhm.
And so,
Right,
without getting into the sidereal and tropical thing, which
right.
is, I'm fine with either as long as there's consistency. You know,
Sure. So in
I
sidereal, it would be in Capricorn, the conjunction.
it'd be about 24, 23, 24 degrees
Yeah.
away. So whatever, you would know
It would
better than
fall. It
I.
would fall back 23 degrees approximately. So if it's in the first degrees of Aquarius, then it would fall back into Capricorn.
Yeah, that sounds right.
The previous sign.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So what I think is going on there, just quickly,
Yeah.
is we have the expansiveness of Jupiter, we have the restriction of Saturn, and we have both of these kings of their domains. So Saturn being the king of the Titans, Jupiter being the king of the gods, and they having a historically dissonant sort of relationship, or mythologically dissonant relationship,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis castration and shit like that. So they don't, they are sort of opposites in those outer kind of planets.
So are you saying that the world can become even more dissonant and upside down than it is right now?
Well, I'm saying there are several ways to look at that.
Right.
I mean, here I'll tell you what the kind of maybe positive part is that they are meeting in the early degrees of the first decan of Aquarius, tropically.
Okay.
And this is something that could be very auspicious in terms of a growing sort of sense of, December 21st also is, if it is not exactly the winter solstice, it's within a day.
Oh yeah.
So that's
meaningful.
Oh my God, yeah. There's just a lot there. That's another show. I mean,
wow. Yeah. No, that's good to get people excited. So, but anyway, brother, let me let you go. It's been a while, but this has been an awesome episode. I hope folks enjoy our conversation as much as we certainly did. I always enjoy talking to you, bro.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me on again. And it's God, we covered a lot of ground and went deep on a lot.
I know. I'm telling you, I'm trying to figure out like what are the bullets here I'm going to list when I talk about some of the things we talked about on the show. I mean, it's probably like 50 bullets or 60 or something. I can't do those all.
I think I'm done now. I think I've told you everything I know. I think I am a completely empty vessel.
There you go. You can die now.
I can now die.
Awesome, bro. All right. Well, thanks, brother. Have a great Sunday from here on out.
All right. You too. We'll talk to you later.
Peace. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye.